Inspiration is a part of life. Without it, many of our favorite games, movies, artworks, even people simply wouldn't exist as they do today. There is nothing wrong with taking inspiration from someone or something, however, the more obvious the influence, the more likely the terms copy, clone, or ripoff will be thrown around. Dante's Inferno is one such game that is clearly inspired by some of the best hack and slashes of the time, like God of War, Devil May Cry, and Bayonetta. It's not subtle inspiration though, which is why I think some can easily lump it in with the terms ripoff or clone, and such words in the gaming industry seem to indicate a bad game, but to me, Dante's Inferno is so much more than that. Don't get me wrong, the similarities are hard to avoid, but I've always looked back on my time with Dante's Inferno and thought this game didn't get the appreciation it deserved, and whether you want to call this game a clone or a copy, even a ripoff, I think there is something about this game that is special. At least, that's what I'm hoping, but nostalgia will get you sometimes, and that's why I wanted to talk about Dante's Inferno today amongst my God of War series of retrospectives, because it is so closely tied to the series in some people's eyes, and I want to find out if it really is more than just a clone, as my mate Mr. Hammers suggested in his video, which I recommend you go and watch, link in the description. So let's put that nostalgia and all the fond memories to the test. I haven't played Dante's Inferno for around 11 years, and so the questions we're going to answer today is, how does Dante's Inferno hold up all these years later? Is it worth your time revisiting or playing for the first time? And simply, is it as good as I remember? Let's find out. There's a lot we need to discuss before jumping into the game, such as the source material and historical setting, the development, and the insane marketing campaign behind the game. I'm serious, this is a chunky segment before we get to talking about the actual game, so if you want to skip ahead, the timecode is on the screen now, as well as all timecodes in the description or playback bar depending on where you're watching this video. Dante's Inferno is loosely based on the poet Dante Alighieri's first part of the Divine Comedy, Inferno. The Divine Comedy, and Inferno specifically, has inspired works for centuries at this point, to a degree where even if you haven't read the poem, you probably know a few lines, like for example, "All hope abandon ye who enter here," is the inscription on the gate to hell, and a pretty well known line, I believe. I mean, it's at the entrance of Dead Man's Crossing in World of Warcraft, and at the beginning of Bret Ellis's American Psycho, to name a couple of examples. Now, Inferno is highly regarded for many reasons, but at least in my opinion, the reason this work has remained relevant and a constant inspiration for many creatives is due to Dante's first-person journey through the 9 circles of hell, and how rich and detailed his descriptions of each circle, its sinners, and punishments are described. The miserable souls of those who lived on earth, neither in infamy nor praise, are doomed forever to this place. Why do they wail so loudly? They have no hope of death. Their blind existence is so base, they're envious of every other fate. This is one of my favorite examples of the sort of quick but descriptive detail Inferno is filled with about each circle and trial of hell. And it's this attention in Dante's writing that evokes such creative inspiration to this day. I'm not going to go over what the game gets right or wrong here though, because as I said at the start, the game is loosely based on the events of Inferno. And whilst I think it paid such an incredible homage to the source material, there are a couple of key differences. One relates to Beatrice, as in the poems, she is the one who sends Virgil to assist Dante in hell, but she is neither his wife nor is she in hell like we experience in game. The second relates to Dante himself, as in the poems he's, well, Dante Alighieri, the poet, and is set around the 13th and 14th century, but in the game, he is a Templar knight from the Third Crusade in the late 12th century. which is a pretty sizable change, but it lets me talk about some history again, which I always enjoy. The Third Crusade began when Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt, captured the Holy Land of Jerusalem in 1187. News of Jerusalem's capture reached the attention of King Richard I of England, King Philip II of France, and the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick I, and the three kings attempted to recapture the Holy Land, which is why the Third Crusade is also known as the King's Crusade. Dante's story takes place during the Siege of Acre, a siege that lasted from August 1189 to July 1191, which also happens to be one of the deadliest battles from the Crusade. Where Dante's story is entwined with real history is in regards to the prisoners he is ordered to protect and then ultimately executes. In reality, King Richard had captured around 2,700 Muslims, holding them hostage for money from Saladin. Saladin agreed to pay King Richard for his people back, but in installments, which was far too slow for King Richard, and ordered all prisoners to be executed. So, you pair Dante's journey through hell inspired by Inferno with a backstory filled with potential sins from a crusader in one of the deadliest battles of that time, and you've got a wealth of potential. I'll explain why it works so well when applicable, and look, I'm not a literature or history expert, so take this info with a grain of salt. But it is important to acknowledge the clear care and respect on display here from the developers. Development-wise, there isn't much information out there in regards to a timeline of events that I can go over here, but by this point it should be obvious why the source material inspired Visceral Games to create Dante's Inferno. With that being said, I do want to discuss possibly Visceral Games' most intelligent decision when it comes to creating Dante's Inferno, and that is enlisting the help of Wayne Barlow. Getting my own bias out the way, Wayne Barlow is one of my favourite artists and a frequent inspiration for myself whilst I was completing my art studies. I'm just a big fan of the way he goes about his art, from the way he draws through his concepts to his completed pieces that often create such a thick, intense visual atmosphere that just draws you in. You probably know Barlow's work even if you don't think you do, as he's worked as a concept artist and a visual designer on films like Blade 2, Hellboy and Hellboy 2, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban and the Goblet of Fire, Avatar, and The Hobbit, to name a few. Anyway, bias aside, Visceral Games enlisted the help of someone who has been working with the themes of hell for close to 2 decades at that point in time, creating his own critically acclaimed works known as Barlow's Inferno. In short, the man knows his way around hell and creature design, so the fact Visceral Games reached out and asked for his help is huge. And his concepts for this game are insane. Seeing his thought process when working through concepts for Karen, the Whores of Babylon, the Unbaptized Babies, and Cerberus is incredible. And he pushed the concepts as far as he could, which is why cut concepts like Cleopatra were just too extreme. I definitely understand why they couldn't quite go that far, but I would have loved to see them try. I think having someone of Barlow's caliber helping on Dante's Inferno is why it succeeds so well in the atmosphere and general feeling of being in hell. With all that being said, that's all I really wanted to touch on in regards to development, so now we need to talk about this insane marketing campaign. This was an element to Dante's Inferno my mind had completely blanked on, but EA really wanted this game to be the beginning of something big because they went all out. A $20,000 a month marketing budget, Super Bowl commercial, and an animated movie releasing alongside the game. Any publicity is good publicity though, right? Well, that's the approach EA went with because there was a fake Mass We Pray game trailer, an interactive sermon and prayer motion controlled game, a fake company called Hawk Panther that was about taking your friend's girlfriend or wife, but upon clicking the link, you'd get busted with a treachery prompt. A check for $200 sent out to video game critics and cashing it in meant you'd succumb to greed, pre-ordering at GameStop on the 9th of September 2009 gave the customer a discount of $6.66. EA sent out a series of packages to gaming publications that upon opening would play Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up until they destroyed the crate, supposedly giving into wrath. By far the diciest promotion, the Sin to Win contest asking convention goers to commit acts of lust on the Dante's Inferno booth babes. Yeah, that one's rough. EA even faked protests at E3 2009 to stir up some more controversy, and then after release and outside the marketing campaign, mind you, Dante's Inferno was subject to further controversy when nannies were angered over an achievement title, apparently. Was all this worth it though? Did the game sell well? It's hard to find any complete year sales numbers, but during its first month, Dante's Inferno sold around 220,000 to 240,000 per platform, so not too shabby. Some say the game almost cracked 500,000, which I wouldn't usually bring up a random commenter, but this comment makes me both laugh and cry simultaneously. So to answer the question of whether all this attention was worth it, well, this ended up being the only Dante's game, so I think that question answers itself. The story for Dante's Inferno follows Dante, a Templar knight that despite his faith has committed a wealth of sins during his time in the Third Crusade. Whilst in the city of Acre, Dante is ordered to keep a group of Saracen prisoners safe so that King Richard can obtain a holy relic from Saladin. This ends in a stalemate between the two leaders, and so in retaliation, King Richard orders for the prisoners to be executed. Once we take control of Dante, we're under attack, which results in Dante being stabbed in the back by an assassin. Death appears and condemns Dante to everlasting damnation for his sins, even though the bishop had promised the Crusaders' sins would be absolved and forgiven by God. Dante refuses this fate, pledges to redeem himself, and slays death with his own scythe. We leave the crusade along the way sewing a holy cross-shaped red tapestry into his flesh that depicts every sin he has committed in his past. Finally, returning to Florence, Dante finds his love Beatrice Portinari and his father Alighiero both brutally murdered as Beatrice's soul appears before us. Beatrice saying she knew Dante would return to her only for the shadowy spirit of Lucifer to appear and drag her into darkness. Dante makes it to a chapel, blesses the cross Beatrice gifted to him when making their vows to one another to protect himself against the evils that await him. The earth cracks open and allows Dante to descend upon the gates of hell. At the gates of hell, Dante encounters the spirit Virgil, who knows of Dante's past sins, yet still agrees to guide him through all 9 circles of hell because Beatrice has promised in exchange for his help, she will give a good word for him in heaven once she's rescued, and so our trek through hell begins. This journey begins as Dante descends on the shores of hell where the freshly damned souls are herded like cattle aboard the great ferry of Charon, and Dante forces Charon to sail him across to the circle of Limbo. After reaching our destination, Dante rips Charon's head off, and once in Limbo we confront the serpent-like judge of the damned, King Minos. Minos denies Dante deeper passage into hell, which is unacceptable, and Dante slays him and enters the second circle, Lust. In Lust, we re-encounter Beatrice's spirit, noticeably being corrupted by Lucifer. Lucifer reveals to Beatrice that Dante broke his vows to Beatrice and slept with a captive woman in Acre, a woman who offered to have sex with Dante in exchange for sparing the life of her brother. Dante reaches the top of a tower in Lust, confronts and kills a gigantic Queen Cleopatra and her lover Mark Antony, progressing further to the third circle, Gluttony. Dante slays the guardian of gluttony in this disgusting intestine-like Cerberus, and it's here where Lucifer shows Dante how Beatrice and his father Alighiero were killed, both slain by Dante's assassin from Acre, revealed to be the husband, not the brother as she had claimed, of the prisoner Dante slept with. In the fourth circle, Greed, Dante encounters the deformed demonic soul of his father Alighiero. We make our way through the puzzles of the fallen god of wealth Plutus, leading to Dante slaying and absolving Alighiero and moving on to the fifth circle, Anger. We float across the river Styx on a seemingly innocent floating platform, but only once Dante reaches the other side, we realize we just rode atop the massive, fiery demon, Phlegus. Once we overcome this massive behemoth, Lucifer and Beatrice reappear, and Beatrice is heartbroken by Dante's betrayals and willingly gives herself to Lucifer by eating the forbidden fruit. We ride atop Phlegus once more, smashing our way through the city of Dis and straight into the sixth circle, Heresy, and then the seventh circle of Violence, where Dante encounters his mother Bella in the Wood of Suicides. Dante is saddened and enraged at the revelation that despite as a child being told his mother died of an illness, she actually ended her own life due to his father's cruelty. Absolving his mother of her sins, we carry on further into the abominable sands and encounter another friendly face in a former friend, fellow crusader, and was soon to be future brother-in-law, Francesco. Francesco is now horribly disfigured and wants revenge against Dante for how he's ended up, but that doesn't go his way as Dante defeats and absolves him, descending into the eighth circle, Fraud. Beatrice puts Dante through the 10 stages of the Malbolge, Evil Ditches, and we make it through to the other side into the ninth and final circle, Treachery. Dante tries to explain to Beatrice that he has faced all of his sins, but she quickly reminds him that he slaughtered all the Saracen prisoners out of anger, and Francesco took the blame for it. This is the final straw as Dante realizes he may have sinned beyond redemption at this point, and admits his place is here in hell, and only asks that Beatrice forgive him. This act of sacrifice brings Beatrice out of Lucifer's grasp, restoring her to her former self, and Dante watches the Archangel Gabriel descend from heaven carrying Beatrice's soul out of hell, and promising Dante that he will see her once more, and his redemption is close now. We push and fight our way through the icy circle of treachery, and finally Dante confronts Lucifer himself as he appears as this enormous, three-faced demon chained to the frozen lake. Dante manages to defeat the giant demon, but Lucifer quickly reveals that in doing so, he had destroyed the chains of Judica, which had kept him imprisoned on this lake and inside the giant demon's body. Lucifer tells Dante that he just used Beatrice as bait to get Dante down here to break these chains and free him, as Lucifer emerges from the giant demon in his true, horned, satyr-like, horse-cocked form and battles Dante. Dante is able to impale Lucifer after a slugfest of a fight, but before he can deal the finishing blow, Lucifer conjures the vision of Dante being stabbed by the assassin in Acre, showing Dante collapse to the ground and revealing to Dante's horror that despite slaying death, he did die and actually cannot leave hell. Lucifer does a victory lap, gloating about how he will rise from hell, overthrow God, and seize heaven, eliminating all that is good from this universe forever. Dante, not giving up and with the aid of the souls he has gained through his trials, absolves himself and re-imprisons Lucifer deep into the ice once more. Dante is then taken to Purgatory, seeing himself near Mount Purgatory with Beatrice's soul awaiting him in paradise. He rips the burnt tapestry off his chest and walks towards the mountain as the tapestry disintegrates into a snake, as Lucifer's laugh echoes, implying the snake is Lucifer's manifestation awaiting his revenge. A to be continued prompt appears, saddening me, and that is the story of Dante's Inferno. Right off the bat, I have to acknowledge my own bias yet again, because as I explained in my Blasphemous review, I love the theme of Christianity or religion in video games. It's a topic filled with potential and it grabs my attention almost instantly, so yes, I love the story presented here in Dante's Inferno. Unraveling Dante's past sins from the Crusade and continuously finding and learning about those connected to him was really engaging. You get a real sense that Dante would be sentenced to hell to suffer eternal damnation, and going from seeing him in the beginning in the forest, sewing all his sins to his skin, seeking redemption and finding out why he must do so, is intriguing, and it's paced out really well. I was hooked in from beginning to end with Dante's story. I wanted to learn more about his character because he portrays himself as a God-fearing individual, yet was so easily led astray from a simple bishop saying he was to be absolved of any and all sins. Witnessing Beatrice's heartbreak the more she learns about Dante's misdeeds, learning about Dante's troubled childhood, how easily he let a friend take the blame for his wrongful acts and pay the ultimate price, and confronting them throughout made for a story I had a lot of fun experiencing. The star of the show is without a doubt Hell though. Visceral Games did an incredible job at setting the atmosphere of each circle perfectly. I mean, the constant screams, cries for help, and even threats from each circle's sinners immerses you in the fact that you are traversing through hell. And again, you feel Dante has done enough in his life to belong here. But it's the attention to detail in regards to the poem and the different mythologies incorporated that, much like God of War and the Greek mythology elements, makes for a captivating experience inside and outside the game. Elements like Cleopatra and Mark Antony, the forbidden lovers of history, the history and backing of the Third Crusade, Greek myths like Charon, the king of the Lapiths, Phlegus, King Minos, who would end up becoming one of the judges of Hades, Cerberus, the characters from the poem come to life like a reimagined Dante, Virgil, and Beatrice, tales of Christianity and hell with each circle of hell, the many rivers and lakes, the forbidden fruit, archangels, and of course, Lucifer. All these different tales of history, myths, and religion are something I find constantly fascinating, and they are present here in Dante's Inferno in a very unique and awesome way. If I was to nitpick the story, I'd say there are a few circles of hell where the story isn't the most involved, being more gameplay centric, which as someone who enjoyed this story is a bummer, but not the end of the world given most circles are relatively short. Dante isn't the most gripping character personality wise, but his story is still enjoyable, so sort of a moot point. How Beatrice flips the switch between full-on succubus back to innocent soul is a little abrupt. I wish that was a little more gradual, and Lucifer is 1 minute bragging about how he is so free and his grand plans to instantly back to being trapped. Again, a little abrupt, but I'm not too sure how you free Lucifer and cage him up in the span of half an hour, so it sort of just is what it is. My only real issue with the story ties into the gameplay a little bit, and that is there's no consequences for absolving or punishing souls. No good or bad ending, not even acknowledged really, which is a letdown because the mechanic has potential story implications, but they don't explore that side of it, so it primarily stays in the gameplay department. That's all I really have to say about the story, and I'll admit, I'm biased, but I like what I like. I think Dante's Inferno is an utterly captivating journey through a destination no one ever wants to go to. It's always adding more and more backstory in regards to Dante's past misdeeds when applicable for each realm of sin, with some enjoyable twists to accompany them. The history, source material, myths and tales are a pure joy to see how Visceral will envision each element, how well they represent each sin, and just the way the story is presented, from the beautiful film-like cutscenes to the gritty animation, is amazing. It does play around with the source material a lot, so I could see hardcore fans of the poem maybe being disappointed with the story, but I enjoyed it. Dante's Inferno was a story I loved revisiting, and I seriously mean it when I say seeing that to be continued end title screen was truly saddening, because I wanted to see how this story and world would progress through purgatory and finally paradise, but it doesn't look like we'll ever see that, which is a real shame. Alrighty Ray, time to address the elephant in the room. Yes, Dante's Inferno follows the same formula I've described in my God of War videos. The game has a heavy emphasis on combat mixed in with some platforming and puzzles for good measure. The arenas and enemy encounters mixed with the way the scythe whips around and flows from combination to combination, it's all very God of War-like. Visceral Games didn't shy away from this fact. I mean, they even poached some God of War developers for assistance during Dante's Inferno's development. Do I have a problem with all this though? No, I don't. I think Dante's Inferno is an absolute blast to play, and where some would say the gameplay feels lazy because it shares so many similarities with another game, I just had fun playing a game like God of War in a totally new setting. The gameplay does have its fair share of hiccups though that I'll be going over shortly, so just remember, overall, I had a blast playing this game. Time to get into the nitty gritty though, and first off, we've got to talk about what makes up the majority of the gameplay cycle, which is the combat. As Dante, you have access to the scythe, the cross, 8 magic abilities, 2 acquired from buying the DLC packs, a further 2 of the remaining 6 abilities are up to the player to choose through leveling, which I didn't. So I just had access to Righteous Path, Lust Storm, Sins of the Father, and Suicide Fruit mixed in with a block, dodge, grab, and redemption meter mechanic. Now immediately, some may criticize the lack of weapon variety, but the scythe does have a transforming quality about it, going from spear-like attacks, hammer or club-like attacks, and, well, scythe attacks. It would have been cool to see even just one more weapon added to Dante's arsenal, as variety in this sort of combat system is always appreciated, pushing away that feeling of repetition, but the general flow of the scythe is so flexible that I didn't notice the lack of a second melee weapon too much. But lack of melee weapons aside, the scythe has a great flow about it. You can switch between the attack types mid-combination and each attack feels purposeful, whether it be whipping around the scythe in a cyclone fashion, spearing the scythe with such speed and reach, or slamming and stunning groups of enemies. These all mix together and make for a weapon that feels great to use. The cross doesn't have the same variety in regards to attacks, and initially it acts as a bit more of an enemy disruptor as opposed to a damaging attack. But as someone who would more often than not upgrade the holy side of the leveling equation, the cross can become an absolute force of nature. The width of attacks, the number of projectiles, and when you factor in certain relics that mean Dante's attacks don't get interrupted by enemy attacks, you can almost spam the enemy into oblivion. The cross can be abused, I won't lie. You can heavily rely on this thing in a lot of encounters. But thankfully, some enemies are immune to such attacks to make sure you do mix up your attacks. In regards to the magic abilities, I primarily stuck with Righteous Path and Lust Storm. Not saying Sins of the Father and Suicide Fruit don't have their place, but because my cross became so beefy in damage output, and I have a stun attack with my scythe, the range of the Sins of the Father and the stunning ability of the Suicide Fruit weren't go-to magic abilities for me. Righteous Path is a great attack that not only packs a punch and staggers enemies, but covers distance really well. And Lust Storm is just that protective, damaging shield that just helps cover your back in case the battle gets hairy. I did have some issues with mana, as I just never felt like I had much to play around with, so the magic portion of combat wasn't something I went to too often, and I know there is relics to assist mana regeneration, but I had my 4 relics locked in pretty hard, and too often mana shrines didn't fully recharge the bar. The redemption ability is a lot like the rage abilities in God of War. It enhances Dante's speed, damage, and fortifies that health bar like nobody's business, and unleashing this is just incredibly satisfying. Again, a little slow in charging up that can be enhanced through relics and leveling, I believe. Might be wrong about that, but I'd like the base speed to get an increase. When you mix all these tools together, you've got a great flowing combat system on your hands that makes you feel like this badass demon slayer. Unfortunately, what is probably the biggest shame in terms of the combat is actually a mechanic I like in concept, and that is punishing and absolving enemies. Here's what I like about the mechanic before I get into the problems. First, I love that it gives players the choice in in regards to leveling, as absolving will result in holy experience and punishing will result in unholy experience. So depending on what magic abilities you enjoy and whether you want more combos and abilities for your cross or your scythe makes for an interesting player choice. I also enjoy that choosing absolve or punish can eventually garner the player some health or mana, which is a godsend when you're in some of the tougher enemy encounters and makes for an interesting choice as to when you'll trigger the quick time event. Where this mechanic detracts from the combat though is with the basic enemies, because you don't need to wail on them to then punish or absolve them. You can do it right away, and some encounters are just a lot of these more basic enemies mixed in with a couple of tougher enemies, so these encounters can boil down to barely any actual combat. Now I'm going to continue to expand upon this issue, but it is also tied to another problem I want to touch on, which is a lack of enemy variety in combat arenas. Don't get me wrong, there is a wealth of different enemies to face in Dante's Inferno, but because a lot of them are tied to specific circles of hell, 1, it can be a slow drip feed of new enemies, and 2, it's not until the latter portions of the game where the enemies begin to share a singular combat encounter. So when you pair enemy encounters filled with basic enemies and tied to a way of progressing your level and what upgrades you can get, the combat can look like you're on checkout as the other demons just wait around looking at you, absolve or punish an enemy. This isn't something that occurs every encounter, though it does happen more often in the first half of the game. But the reason I have such an issue with it is you're incentivized to use this mechanic if you want to be constantly leveling up, and for me, it takes away from the combat far too often. I love the mechanic, I just think there needs to be either less basic enemies, more various enemy encounters, or simply just making every enemy need to have been attacked in order to get the reward. Whilst we're on the topic of awesome concept, less so execution, the moments you can ride the Asterian beasts are truly badass moments throughout the game. Being able to take out the tougher enemies in a few stomps or torch them with a fire breath makes for epic moments in combat. There is just a few too many of these moments to a point where repetition does rear its ugly head, lessening the impact of being able to control these hulking beasts. Also, riding atop the demon Flagus was just an entirely missed opportunity, as you mostly just lumber around the city of Dis and don't do that much. Could have been a chance for an epic big battle, but ends up feeling lackluster. Overall, I do think the combat is great fun. The combat encounters do mix it up often enough to keep the tedium away. Mostly, Dante's arsenal is an absolute blast to use and experiment with. Aspects like the 10 trials while slowing down the pace of the game a tad are great refreshing challenges, and again, it all just makes for a badass demon slaying venture. If they just improved some aspects, like the easy to kill enemies and made the Asterian beast less frequent, with some other minor tweaks to further fend off repetition, I would have had a harder time faulting the combat. Dante's journey through hell isn't just about fighting various damned souls and demons though, as we've got a fair few boss battles to get through along this trek, and for the most part, they're a good time. Some aren't the most complex fights, but where they lack in challenge, they more than make up for in being visual epics. The first boss in the game is against Death, a battle where you've barely had 10 minutes to get used to the controls, so this is very much a tutorial boss. Not too complicated, doesn't hit too hard, but offers a lot of essential teaching tools with simple attacks you can block and evade with plenty of openings to strike back. It's good practice, and for being a fight where you're still getting the hang of everything, it's a battle that provides a great feeling of power about it. I mean, you're killing Death, how much more badass could you get? Again, simple fight but great fun. Next up is King Minos, the Judge of the Damned, who isn't the best boss battle. You have a very claustrophobic arena, but it's a lot of dodging and waiting around for openings. Awesome death though, just not a spectacular fight. Next is the battle against Cleopatra and Mark Antony, which is more so a battle against Mark Antony as Cleopatra isn't all that involved, but this is a really enjoyable fight regardless. Mark Antony's attacks are very quick with little tells you need to keep a serious eye out for. He deals a significant amount of damage, covers distance well, has both range and melee attacks, and is relatively hard to stun, meaning you need to get in and out. Thankfully, Cleopatra drops health when attacked, otherwise this would be a brutal fight. But this is a boss battle that has the right balance of challenge and fun, especially for this early stage in the game. Then we have the battle against Cerberus that killed me immediately when I first reached it, so great first impression. No, but seriously, this fight is pretty good. You don't have the wealth of various attacks like a humanoid enemy, but they deal big damage and you need to find openings in order to bait the heads into attacking, so they can be stunned. The fight gets easier the less heads there are, but overall, not the most challenging battle, but a boss that is a lot of fun to face. Next is Dante's father Alighiero, which is a boss I beat probably the quickest of the lot, but still an enjoyable fight. Alighiero is just a little sluggish, and by this point in the game you have more tools in your arsenal. Don't get me wrong, he hits hard, the arena shrinks as the fight progresses, making his hits harder to avoid, but he can be stunned quite a bit, and his openings for attacks last a little bit as well, making for a quick but intense duel that's still a lot of fun. Then we have the battle against Francesco, who feels like an upgraded Mark Antony. He has a lot of quick attacks with little tells, covers the arena well, and can pack a punch, but this time he doesn't take much damage if any from cross attacks, but the enemies he summons require it, and he can take a beating. I love this fight because by this point I was a heavy cross user in combat, and it just barely works on him, requiring a more tactical fight that is quite stressful when you pair in the hordes of enemies that can swarm in the arena. I love this fight. Francesco truly makes you put all your tools to good use, and makes for a great duel. Lastly, but certainly not least, we face off against Lucifer, and I'll be honest, this fight is tough. The first phase isn't my personal favorite because it just feels like an endurance race of dodging his incredibly quick attacks and hoping you can dodge enough of them to stun him and eventually progress to phase 2. Phase 2 is a great fight. Again, tough as hell, and that absolute horse cock he's slanging around is a little distracting, but a great duel. His attacks are quick but fair, you need to be sparing with your cross attacks, but with the slam attacks and magic abilities, he can be slain. Well, at least into his last phase, which is very much a grappling fight. Do not stay on the ground. As soon as you see the RB or R1 button, press it because this phase is no joke and he will spam you into defeat. The Lucifer fight's peak is that second phase. It's a great duel that is a fair challenge and worthy of being a boss battle against Satan. The first and third phases aren't my favorite, but all in all, what a battle to end the game. The bosses here are a great time. The challenge may not always be intense, but they're more often than not great battles that do test the player's knowledge of the combat and offer incredible set pieces along with brutal kills. My personal favorites would be that second phase against Lucifer, the battle against Francesco and Mark Antony, but I had a blast with each battle. It's not all combat though. In fact, there are a few moments where you'll have a good solid break from fighting and just be platforming around searching for secrets, along with a few puzzles for good measure. Let's get the puzzles out of the way first because my thoughts on the platforming tie into a larger point I want to make. Dante's Inferno puzzles are alright. The true highlight is the mirror maze, especially if you want to grab all the secrets, as it really is a mind-bending platforming puzzle that has you second guessing yourself a few times. Other than that though, you have your standard block pushing puzzles or pulling a lever, nothing too spectacular, but can break up the combat, which is appreciated. And the 10 trials could be considered puzzles at times, such as the stay off the ground for 8 seconds, but again, overall nothing all that special. The platforming though is where I finally get to talk about hell in regards to the gameplay. When you begin traversing the many walls filled to the brim with damned souls or cross great distances on the many tightrope sections, Dante's Inferno does such an amazing job at immersing you in that feeling of traveling through the circles of hell. The aura and atmosphere created from souls screaming in torment, the constant changes to the environment from the uncertainty of limbo to the grotesque icky feeling of gluttony, the heat emitted from anger is truly hellish. The river of boiling blood visually popping due to the unlimited amount of gore, or the wood of suicides and the thick, dark atmosphere. Whatever the environment, Dante's Inferno nails the atmosphere and doomed nature of each circle so perfectly you can't help but be immersed. This is so noticeable because the platforming itself is again alright but quite repetitive. A lot of walls to climb, ropes to swing across and tight ropes to hang from. It's nothing all that special, and yet I relished every platforming section because it lets you decompress from the combat and absorb all this hellish atmosphere to not only help the story, but help the player feel like they entered a place where no one wants to go. On the whole, is the gameplay perfect? No. It has its fair share of issues for sure. The combat isn't without flaws and the platforming and puzzles mostly are just alright if a bit repetitive. But when Dante's Inferno is on, it's on. The combat is fluent and powerful. The bosses are great combat tests and epic to boot. The mirror maze was so good and the platforming, if nothing else, immerses the player in hell. The gameplay may have been inspired by God of War or Devil May Cry, and it may stumble in a few instances, but overall, what a blast Dante's Inferno is to play. So, was Dante's Inferno as good as I remembered, and is it more than just a God of War clone? Yes, and yes. Dante's Inferno was actually better than I remembered because I was so captivated by the story as I've read the poem this time around, and the gameplay, whilst flawed, is still just so much fun. As for whether it's a clone or a copy or even a ripoff, I just don't see Dante's Inferno that way. I think it wears its inspirations on its sleeve, it reminds me of other games, but coming from someone who is balls deep in the God of War series at the moment, that hellish atmosphere, the unique source material, and even the combat do feel very different. In many ways, it does feel like one of a kind. Yes, it's a hack and slasher. Yes, it follows a similar formula to God of War, but it still feels like its own thing. I loved my time revisiting Dante's Inferno, and I think if it's been a while or you've never played it, go and give this game a crack, because at the end of the day, if nothing else, it is a great demon slaying adventure. And although very unlikely, if someone wants to reboot, remake, or even remaster this game and then continue on with Purgatory and Paradise, I would love to see it. But unfortunately, that's unlikely, so for now, just have fun playing what is, in my opinion, one of the underappreciated gems of the 7th generation of consoles. Thank you all so much for watching. I had such a great time revisiting Dante's Inferno, and I hope you enjoyed revisiting the game with me. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave it a like because it helps let me know that you enjoyed yourself. Comment below your thoughts on Dante's Inferno, as well as any suggestions for games you want to see covered in the future. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, go give my socials a follow if you fancy, @MayorHairBear, and I'll catch you all in the next video.